For those of you guys that are familiar with my channel and have been following me for a while, you'll probably realise that I like to use a lot of different mediums, and I do create a lot of mixed media art. So in today's video, I thought I would go through some do's and don'ts for using different mediums together, show you guys what works and what is going to cause a total disaster. So anyway guys, let's get into it. The first medium that we're going to discuss is watercolour, and I want to talk about some mediums that work great with watercolour when they are wet. And so the first medium is inks. Inks work great with watercolour. As you can see here, I've got some gold metallic ink, and I'll show you how great it looks when you drop the ink into wet watercolour. You can see it just gives a really nice effect, and you can try this out with lots of different inks and they just work really nicely to give some really cool effects. The next medium is gouache. Gouache also works well with watercolour because you can add the watercolour to the gouache and get some really pale, like pastel-y colours. And I only own white gouache, and if you want to make any other colours, I just like to add a bit of watercolour into the gouache and you can get some really nice looks. I don't use gouache too much, but I found that this gives you a bit more of a thick consistency, like watercolour is very thin. So if you want something a bit thicker and really nice and pastel-y, then I definitely recommend trying this out. It's really nice and gives really pretty results, I think. Moving on to watercolour when it's dry. So there's lots of mediums you can add on top of a dry layer of watercolour. The first being gel pen. So I like to use white gel pen for highlights, and you can see here it works really great. So does gouache. Gouache works great at being really opaque, so you can add really opaque highlights with the gouache as well. You can just see how it basically covers up the whole of the watercolour, and you can dilute it down with more water to get a more transparent effect if you want as well. Moving on to pastels. If you wanted, say, something like a really soft, cloudy look over your watercolours, then you could go in and add a layer of pastel and blend it out, and you can use that for soft effects. And if you want more sharp details, then you can go in with coloured pencil and add some details as well. Or if you wanted to outline things, you can go in with fine liners. I like to do this a lot with my loose animal watercolour pieces that you guys might have seen. As you can see, there's a lot of versatility with watercolour. Now let's go through a few things that don't work. And firstly, as you can see, I've got pastel and colour pencil here, and I'm going to add a layer of watercolour over the top of both of them. The first thing you'll notice is when I applied the watercolour, I was applying a very pastel-y, bright green colour, but when I go over the top of the pastel, it mixes together, and you can see it becomes a lot darker than the colour I am originally adding. And so it doesn't really work this way around. You can add pastel on top of watercolour, but if you add watercolour on top of pastel, you'll just get like a muddy mess. And with coloured pencil, mediums don't really go well on top of coloured pencil because coloured pencil has got that waxy, shiny layer finish, so it doesn't really stick to it well. Pastel and coloured pencil also work great together, but again, there is a specific way around that they work together. Firstly, as you can see, I'm adding a layer of pastel, and I'm also going to be creating a little swatch of coloured pencil below it as well. And so remember what I said earlier about the fact that mediums don't really work well on top of coloured pencil. So at the top here, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to add a layer of coloured pencil over the top of the pastel, and you can see it just goes on really nicely. It just goes over the top of the pastel. You can shade it in, you can add more crisp details, and therefore you can add the pastel to block in the areas, get them really quickly shaded in because it blends nicely, and then use the coloured pencil for details. On the other hand, adding pastel on top of coloured pencil doesn't really work. You know, you're trying to add something that's quite chalky on top of something that's waxy and slick. It just doesn't work well. It's unpredictable, and you're not going to get very nice, smooth results. So make sure that when you're using them together, you're adding the coloured pencil on top of the pastel to get the best results. Now, graphite and charcoal are two very popular mediums, but not many people use them together. In fact, I love to use these two mediums together all of the time, but again, there is a specific way around that they should go. So as you can see, I am applying two little swatches of graphite. The first two are really burnished and I'm going in really hard, and then on the bottom one that I'm doing now, I'm being a lot lighter with my pressure on the pencil. So again, these are all graphite. Now I'm going to go in with my charcoal pencil and I'm going to try and go over the top of all of these with the charcoal. What you will notice with the first two is that the charcoal, it applies to the paper all of the way around the outside of where that graphite swatch is, but it simply won't stick on top of the graphite. And this is because, again, the graphite is creating that slick layer and the charcoal simply has nothing to grip and grab onto. So remember, charcoal does not go well on top of a heavy layer of graphite. What does work though is if you have an area that only has a little bit of graphite on it, you've not burnished it out, it will stick onto some graphite if there isn't too much, if there's still some of the tooth of the paper that the charcoal can grip onto. Now, another thing that works is if you use these two mediums but just don't use them in the same area. Use the charcoal in areas that you want to be dark and then use the graphite in the lighter areas. Another medium that quite surprisingly works really well with graphite is coloured pencil, and that might seem strange. You don't really think of using graphite with coloured pencil, but you can see here that I've done a little swatch of graphite and now I'm going in with my black Faber-Castell Polychromos pencil, and this is a technique that I've been using quite a bit recently after I found it out and gave it a try and was amazed at the results of this. It is a really nice effect, and you might think, why would you use that? But it's great for getting those really dark values that you find it hard to get with your graphite pencil. As you can see though, when I do this next swatch, I'm adding the coloured pencil first. Graphite does not work well on top of coloured pencil, so make sure you're using a layer of graphite first and then adding the coloured pencil over the top for your final layers. One other medium that works great with coloured pencil is markers. So a lot of people love using markers for their base and then going over the top and adding details and shading in areas with the coloured pencil. And so, like you probably have guessed by now, coloured pencils work great on top of the markers, but they don't work great the other way around. So you can see here, you can see just how nicely coloured pencil goes over the top of a layer of marker. It's really opaque. It basically covers up the marker, so you can do it for any mistakes, fixing mistakes. But when you add marker on top of coloured pencil, it's a bit of a mess. It just kind of dilutes some of the coloured pencil, breaks it down and just smudges it everywhere. So make sure you're doing it the right way around. If you have a style of drawing where you really like to do nice black line art or just line art with a fine liner pen or some sort of ink, and you also want to colour it in with coloured pencil, then you might not be sure which way round is best to do this, because as you can see, when you add fine liner on top of coloured pencil, it looks really nice when you put it down. It's nice and crisp. It just stands out really well. You think that this way works really nicely, but as you'll see in a second, it doesn't look great. For example, once you start putting some pressure on it, the ink isn't fully drying, so it smudges really easily. And for example, if you then decide you need to go over with another layer of coloured pencil, it's not great. You can see it just smudges everywhere. It smudges so easily. So what I recommend is make sure you do your line art first. So get in all of your line art with all of your ink pens before you go in with coloured pencils, and then you can add all of your layers of coloured pencils over the top without having to worry about any of your ink smudging, because it will definitely smudge if you do it the first way. The final combination of mediums that I want to talk about are coloured pencil, marker and gel pen. Really, how well does gel pen work with these two mediums? As you can see, firstly, white gel pen or any gel pens go really nicely on top of markers, and you'll see a lot of artists here on YouTube use gel pens to add their final little highlights or add a bit of line art over the top of their marker illustrations, and it works beautifully. I do this a lot with my pieces of artwork as well. But also, a lot of people like using white gel pen or any gel pens on top of coloured pencil. And whilst it actually does go on top, it will go on, it's a bit harder for it to go on. It doesn't go on as easily as markers. It just isn't archival. It will wipe off quite easily. So make sure you're not using this for any pieces of artwork that you want to sell, especially if people are buying it for a lot of money. They want to make sure that their artwork will last for a long period of time. If you'd like to see even more examples of how I use all of these mediums together, then I've got loads of real-time tutorials available on my Patreon for you guys, including these three you can see here that I did last month. And in these tutorials, you can follow along with me in real time as I do the whole thing. So I really recommend you guys check that out. I'll leave a link at the top of the description for you guys. I have got over 200 tutorials now available over on there. Anyway guys, those are my do's and don'ts for using lots of different mediums together. I really hope you learned something in this video. If you did, please comment down below what did you learn and what new mediums are you really excited to give a try. But that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new around here to see more tips and tutorial videos for lots of different mediums. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye everybody.